Hello everybody, it's Tor Davis at Co-Kinetic here, and today's webinar covers the topic of GDPR and marketing. So just to set expectations, this is going to be very specific to marketing only. It doesn't cover the GDPR management of data for your other business purposes, and I am definitely no legal eagle, so please don't depend on my advice in a legal context. What I have done is I've just returned from a really great show called COPA, which is held every year here in London in the UK, and it's designed specifically for physical and manual therapists. And we organised and hosted a brilliant day in one of the theatres on the second day of the show, which featured a whole bunch of really brilliant speakers, and I will be putting those presentations online for those of you who are interested. But one of those presentations was GDPR and marketing, and obviously I did quite a lot of research in order to create that presentation. So for those of you who don't know me, I started life as a physiotherapist, and then I worked briefly in marketing before setting up my own clinical journal, which was basically designed to translate research into practical application. Everything I've done in the entire time in business has always been focused on creating resources that help practitioners save time and therefore also money most of the time. And over the last couple of years, I've been running a marketing business alongside the clinical journal, which helps clinicians to market and promote themselves. And as a result of this experience, I'm now creating ready-made content which plugs into a website that I've had some technology guys build for me, that helps you put this marketing content to work with little or no technical skills. Basically, you can run a complete marketing strategy in as little as 5 hours a month that brings you as many new leads and customers as you need it to. But we're not here to talk about that, so if you'd like more info on that, please just go and visit co-kinetic.com, that's co-kinetic.com. And in the meantime, let's crack on with the show. So I'm going to be super quick about this because there's a few sort of boring bits we've just got to get out of the way, but let's just have a quick look at key facts. I'm sure that everybody by now knows what GDPR stands for. It's a General Data Protection Regulation, and it basically supersedes the Data Protection Act in 1998. As you can imagine, a lot has changed in terms of technology in that time, and it's a long overdue change in regulation. Now, GDPR cannot be discussed in isolation because one of the areas which is not getting quite so much coverage is the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations, or PECR, which covers specifically marketing communications that are electronic. And this is slowly being superseded by another EU privacy regulation called e-privacy regulation, which is not active yet, but it is expected to become active, and it's been developed alongside the changes to GDPR. Okay, so the primary priority of GDPR really revolves around this issue of personal data, and personal data means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, otherwise known as a data subject. And this is what we have to keep coming back to whenever we discuss anything to do with GDPR. Its focus and priority is all about protecting personal data. Now, as most of you probably know, there are 6 key principles of GDPR, and we won't hover too long on these because you've probably been through this enough times already if you've been affected by GDPR. The first one is that data is processed transparently, i.e. people know what you're going to do with their data. Point 2 is that it's collected for specified, explicit and legitimate purposes. Point 3 is that it's limited to what's needed only, no more random personality quizzes that collects all sorts of superfluous data. Point 4 is that it's kept accurate, and if not, then it's deleted. Point 5 is that it's only linked to an identifiable individual for as long as necessary. And point 6 is that data security is paramount. Now, in a marketing context, that boils down to 3 things. You have, and you can clearly demonstrate, consent. Data can only be used for the purpose it was collected. And 3 is that the person has a right to complete deletion. So what's the impact of GDPR? Well, it's all about giving us back choice and control over our personal data, which really is long overdue. It gives us control about who contacts us and with what kind of information. And in the short term, it probably is going to make marketing a lot harder, at least to start with, because we're so used to having no control. In the long term, it will be a much, much better outcome, and the successful businesses will be the ones who focus on building trusting relationships with their customers. As I put it, it might be a pain in the butt now, but it's absolutely the right thing to happen. So while it may seem a big pain in the butt at the moment while we're all caught up in the administrative nightmare of it all, there are a lot of benefits to having a really active opted-in list. Now, most estimates are suggesting that we may retain, say, 10 or 20%. One piece of research that I saw suggested we might retain 50% of our existing list, which personally I think is quite optimistic. And that is quite scary that we're going to lose that many of our existing list. But in reality, if you're only getting a sort of 18% to 25% open rate, which to be honest would be pretty good, then only that many people were seeing your emails in the first place. So it's not as bad as it actually seems. And cleaning your email list can improve 3 key metrics: deliverability, open rates, and click rates. And the better these metrics, the more successful your email marketing campaigns are likely to be. And on the flip side, the more bounces, spam complaints, and unsubscribes you get, the more you're probably being penalised by big internet service providers like Gmail, Hotmail, and Yahoo, which means that people who did want to see your content were probably not even getting it either. So that's a big advantage. Add that to the fact that a smaller list of engaged subscribers, so people who actively read and interact with your content, is much more valuable than a large list of subscribers who never do anything. It's a no-brainer. And if you pay for an email platform, then your costs are likely to decrease because you're sending less emails to less people. And in terms of GDPR, let's face it, data security is going to be a lot better. So let's look at the 6 lawful grounds for data processing. There are basically 6 for businesses as a whole, but in terms of marketing, there are only 2 really that matter to us. We have consent of the data subject and necessary for the purposes of legitimate interests. We'll cover legitimate interest first. This is basically the most flexible of all the 6 lawful bases, and it's not focused on a particular purpose, so it gives you a lot more scope to potentially rely on it in many different circumstances. So it could be the most appropriate basis when the process isn't required by law, but it is of clear benefit to you or others, where there's a limited privacy impact on the individual, where the individual should reasonably expect you to use their data in that way, and where you can't or don't want to give the individual full upfront control, i.e. consent, or bother them with disruptive consent requests when they are likely to object to the processing. Now, the disadvantages of using legitimate interest as a lawful base is that there's probably more work for you to do to justify the application of legitimate interest compared to some of the other lawful bases. The other lawful bases do incorporate a necessity test, which this doesn't. So in this case, the onus is very much on you to ensure and demonstrate that your interests with what you're sending are balanced with those of the individual. Now, I've spoken to 3 specialists specifically on this topic, data protection specialists on this topic, and everyone agrees that relying on legitimate interest for re-permissioning your list probably won't cut it. So if you're going to not re-permission your list on that basis, I would strongly advise against it. If you can get initial consent, that is much the best option. So let's look at the subject of consent. So as you can see, consent means offering individuals real choice and control about the data you hold and what you do with it. It requires a positive opt-in. The consent ideally should be specific and granular, and what they mean by that is that you can choose the methods that you're contacted by, and I've taken it a step further actually and said give them options about the kind of information that they want to receive from you. You should clearly specify why you want the data and what you're going to do with it. The explanations need to be clear and concise and written in plain English. It should be easy for people to withdraw consent, and you need to keep evidence of consent, who, when, how, and what you told people. And I really would suggest you prioritise going for the consent route. It's much better to do it now, get your ducks in a row, and it is the gold standard in terms of the lawful bases. It does require a bit more effort, but if you do it properly, it's the strongest set of grounds for processing personal data. Now there's another element that we have to bear in mind when it comes to marketing, and that is the lesser known privacy and electronic communication regulations. And even if GDPR doesn't apply to something, i.e. it's not about personal data, PECR may still apply and you may still need consent under PECR. So PECR basically governs specifically marketing delivered electronically, and that includes, well, you can see there, marketing calls, emails, texts and faxes are all considered to be electronic communications. It also covers cookies and tracking pixels. It covers keeping communication services secure, customer privacy, and it does apply even if you're not processing data, so this is really important. As I said earlier, it's being superseded by a new e-privacy rule or regulation, but there isn't any date for when that will become regulation. And it basically does mean that you will often need specific consent to send unsolicited direct marketing. And obviously the best way to obtain valid consent is to ask people to tick opt-in boxes confirming that they're happy to receive marketing calls. So you may as well just treat it all under the same banner with GDPR. So here are some practical steps to comply with consent. Make sure your privacy policy is meeting the GDPR standard, sometimes also called the privacy notice. This is really important. That needs to be very clear, very concise and as detailed as possible. And make sure that the privacy policy includes a link where your contacts can control their granular contact options. And make sure that when you do ask for consent, it does require a positive opt-in and that you are tracking that positive opt-in. Keep evidence of how that consent's being given. Understand the difference between PECR and GDPR and which one is important at which point. And basically ensure that data held from May the 25th onwards was and is collected in a GDPR compliant manner. And here is a checklist that you should just run through when you're obtaining consent for marketing. So you use opt-in boxes, you specify methods of communication, you ask for consent to pass details to third parties for marketing and to name those third parties in your privacy policy. I would advise against this, and I shouldn't think that, well, certainly none of the clients that I work with ever share any of their contact details, even if they are just collected in a marketing context. I certainly don't through my business and never have, and I would highly suggest that unless you really have a specific need to do this, you don't either, and that you make that very upfront on any lead collection forms that that's the case. And lastly, that you record when and how you got consent and exactly what it covers. And here's a checklist for marketing by email or text. So you only text or email with opt-in consent. You offer an opt-out by reply or either using an unsubscribe link. You keep a list of anyone who opts out. You filter against your opt-out list, i.e. you don't send to them. And you keep this list synced across any platforms that you're using that store email addresses. So how do you do all of that? Well, I think this is one of the main cases for getting a bespoke email marketing platform, because if you get a good platform, it will do most of those things for you. As most of you know, I'm a big fan of MailChimp. They literally cover all of these elements for you. So they provide an opt-in, so there's a sign-up form which gives you a load of preferences that you can manage. You can edit those as you want to, and obviously they give you the opt-out options. Ever since I've used MailChimp, which is probably for the last 15 years, you cannot send an email out without having an unsubscribe link in there, which sometimes if I'm using them for delivering customer information, i.e. contractual information, that's a bit inconvenient. They offer you the ability to segment your subscription and contact preferences. They manage and record all the unsubscribes and the subscriber histories. They provide the right to be forgotten and the functionality so that data can be deleted. You can manage the whole right of access and right of portability element of it. And one thing you do need to make sure, and MailChimp is covered under the EU-US Privacy Shield, is that that whatever platform it is that you're using needs to be covered under that. So the Privacy Shield is basically an agreement between the EU and the US, which allows for transfer of personal data from the EU to the US. So let's have a little look at a practical sign up or preferences form. So this is my preferences form. As you can see on the left hand side, I've done a whole screenshot of the form, at least the top half of the form. As you can see, I've done a bit of a blurb at the top, just introducing myself and sharing a bit more about what I want to share with them in terms of contact information. And then underneath there's a bunch of tick boxes. Now these are tools and resources that I have created in the past, which people may not have seen previously. So actually this is quite good, because if they go to their profile form, then they have an option of selecting these, and these trigger autoresponders. We're looking at the middle picture now. The tick box is saying marketing and business growth content. As you can see, there's a specific category under there saying I want to understand how Co-Kinetic can help me grow my business or stay up to date clinically. If they don't tick those boxes, I don't send the information. It's that simple. So if people are specifically interested, then they need to ask, and that will trigger the emails that will explain more about those two things. And then on the third image on the right hand side, you'll see in the sort of yellow panel which says contact preferences or contact permissions. This is MailChimp's extra element that they've applied for GDPR, and you can go and edit that, the text in both of those top and bottom parts and the tick boxes. And then obviously once they click subscribe, MailChimp is storing all that information for me. It stores what data they were shown at the time that they ticked those boxes, and then the time, how, when, where, all of that sort of thing. So they're managing all of that side of things for me. And here's a lead collection page that we are hosting on our site as part of our marketing platform. So one of the things we do is collect leads for you off the back of social media posts that we create for you, and we collect those email leads. So we have obviously also done quite a lot of work to turn our platform into a GDPR compliant platform. So you can see that we've only got 2 fields in this case. So this is a landing page which encourages people to sign up to their email newsletter. Remember, we're hosting this on behalf of our customers, and these resources that you see there are all resources that we produce that you can then utilize as part of your marketing. So you would send people here if you wanted them to sign up to your newsletter, if you didn't have another sign up method or you just preferred our one. And as you can see, it only collects the necessary info. So we've just got 2 fields there, the first name and email address. There are 2 clear choices for the information that they'd like to receive below that, or not, as the case may be. And those are positive opt-ins, so they have to tick them positively. We mention in the text underneath, which you probably may not be able to read, that there's a link to the privacy policy at the footer of the page. You can't see the footer of this page because obviously that's customized to every customer, because they have the option of customizing that footer, putting their logo, putting their specific link to their privacy policy, a link back to their website, telephone numbers, that kind of thing. So it's fully transparent. We explain exactly what they're signing up to, exactly the kind of stuff that they're going to get, and there's a very strong focus on value and benefits. So it's all very upfront. So my moral of my story, of this story, is just don't freak out, because this is about doing as you would want to be done by. Just keep calm, carry on, and just do it transparently. Be upfront, get consent, be respectful of people's inbox and time, be conscientious, and treat your clients and customers essentially as if they were your friends. Now, there's one element here that you may not have thought about, or may not obviously see where it all fits in when it comes to GDPR and PECR, but just bear with me. So where does paid traffic and paid advertising fit in? This is one of the questions that crops up most frequently when I'm doing my workshops and seminars. And essentially it boils down to Google AdWords and Facebook ads, because they're currently accounting for pretty much 80% of all online advertising spend. And in its most simple form, this is advertising that's targeted by certain criteria that we set as an advertiser, and then it's displayed on Facebook or Google in a way that matches as closely as those platforms are able to match those people. So they deliver ads to people that we've targeted for a certain reason. And the most obvious kind of forms of this are Google search results, the Google ad widgets on other people's websites, the Facebook news feed and the ads that you see around the outside of the Facebook pages you visit, particularly when you're on the desktop, not so much on the mobile, but you would see them in the news feed in the mobile. But there's a more sophisticated application of these types of ads, which is called either remarketing or retargeting. They're both essentially the same thing. Sorry, that was the dog flomping on the floor. But they're both basically exactly the same thing, and this is essentially what retargeting is all about. You'll know retargeting because you'll have been on the other end of it. So say you were looking at a pair of trainers on Amazon, and then all of a sudden you see those trainers popping up everywhere, or flights is another one, or hotels. You might have been looking at flights on a flight website, and all of a sudden you see offers for flights to the same place that you were looking at popping up on other random websites as you're trawling around the internet. And basically this works by websites installing a small piece of code or a tracking pixel on your browser as soon as you visit a website. And if you then visit another website that's looking for that tracking code can tell the website exactly what you were previously interested in, and then refocus its marketing to deliver you more of the same thing. Obviously, if somebody's paid for it to do that. So the example above in this image looks at a more traditional context of retargeting or remarketing, and it uses an ad as an example, but this could equally apply to any kind of content. You don't have to necessarily be running advertising promotions. It could be promoting a new article that you've written, or a new blog post, or a new event that you're about to run. So what does this actually mean? Well, I did some Googling about this, and there's stacks and stacks of articles which tell you all about the benefits of retargeting and remarketing for businesses, but there's actually a lot less about what it means for us as the viewer. But in my view, there's a big upside, because it means that the content that you see is much more likely to be relevant to you, and it's much more likely to reflect your interests. And effectively, the content on the internet is being personalised to suit your desires. And it doesn't stop us finding what we want. This is what we have to remember. While it might be redirecting us towards more of what we have been looking for, it doesn't stop us if we're looking for something specific. But it does mean that all the other stuff around the edges that might previously have been totally irrelevant is now much more likely to be relevant. And for me, I think that's a win-win. But it does involve the use of data. But the really interesting thing around all of this is, how does that sit with GDPR, and more specifically PECR, so the Privacy, the Electronic Communications Regulation? Now, cookies and pixels particularly fall under the remit of PECR, so consent is relevant here. So you do need to have consent if you're going to target or retarget people, or use the Facebook pixel, or use anything like Google Analytics. Now, you might sort of turn around and go, oh my God, I'm just not going to use it because it's easier not to. Well, just hold your horses, because actually there's lots and lots and lots of benefits, and anyone who saw my Facebook advertising presentation at COPA will have a much better idea of what benefits come with using retargeting, and particularly using data. But we're just going to have a quick look at some examples here. So there's two kind of big issues when it comes to deciding how this actually is applied within the GDPR PECR context. One is, who is the data controller? So who has the first person relationship with the subject of the data? And the other one is, does it actually involve personal data? If it doesn't involve personal data, then that doesn't invoke GDPR. But it does still potentially concern, well, definitely concern PECR. Now, the interesting thing is, retargeting doesn't actually lead to the identification of an individual unless they take an action that involves sharing this personal data, in which case GDPR does apply. But as long as it's all done transparently and with consent, that's totally fine. So there's nothing to stop you putting Facebook pixels or Google Analytics tracking code on your website, as long as you are upfront and transparent about it. So let's look at it in the context of some advertising streams that you might use, for example with, say, Facebook. So who's got the first party relationship? Who controls the data? Well, Facebook detailed targeting, that just means that you're running an ad to a detailed target group of people that Facebook knows about but you don't know about, and you don't have anything to do with any of the data. You've just put the ad up there and you've said, I want to target 18 to 40-year-olds who have an interest in running. Facebook, go do it for me. In that case, Facebook are the data controller, they're also the data processor, and the responsibility is solely theirs. Facebook custom audiences, bit different. Now, for those of you who don't use Facebook advertising yet, custom audiences is where you upload, for example, a list of an email list, and you ask Facebook to basically match it up. Now, you're giving Facebook the data in that case, and you are the one with the first party relationship. So you can't actually, well, you can target, but you can't specifically say, I want to target Tor Davis in Merton. But you are uploading that data and you're giving that to Facebook, and you're saying, go find all of these subscribers on Facebook so that I can run ads to those people or promotions to those people. So you are the data controller in that case. Facebook is just a data processor, and you have responsibility for the data. A lookalike audience. Now that's an interesting one as well, because lookalike audiences are basically built around uploaded data, and it finds people who have similar interests and similar profiles. Again, that's down to Facebook. They control the data. They're just matching it with your data in the custom audiences. They are the data processor. The responsibility is theirs. Facebook Analytics is a similar thing to Google Analytics. It's feeding off data from your website or from what it's tracking, where your pixel's installed or where the code is installed for Facebook. So actually that data belongs to you, and Facebook is just acting as a data processor. Facebook lead ads. These are a very effective way of collecting new leads. It's a native little form that Facebook pre-populates for you. So it's very, very easy for people to sign up using lead ads. But obviously you get the data, so you then become the data controller. And the Facebook pixel is the most interesting of all of them. We'll come back to that in a minute, because there's a load of legal cases going on at the moment, which makes that a little bit different. So basically, if you are the data controller, you have to be able to demonstrate these things. And remember, this applies to the privacy and electronic communications regulations. It doesn't necessarily have to be specific to GDPR. But you have to be able to demonstrate how the data is being collected, what exactly you're using that data for. You need to be able to demonstrate that people have explicitly agreed to you to holding and using that data, that you can show how long it's going to be held for on record. You give people the ability to easily opt out, and that people have the right to access the data you hold on them. So all the same rules apply. So let's look briefly at the Facebook pixel and Google Analytics. There's nothing to stop you using them. Facebook have been a bit under the cosh in various EU countries for violating privacy laws. Now the interesting point here is that you put this piece of code or this pixel or whatever it is on your website. So basically what that means is that you are giving Facebook data. So they are taking data off your website, but you've given them the consent to do that by putting that tracking pixel or that Google Analytics code on there. So in actual fact, that data is your data. So what it looks like is going to transpire, and there's a case going on in Europe at the moment where this looks like it's going to come out to decide that you are both you and Facebook are the data controller. GDPR requires joint controllers to have a contractual agreement that accounts for their kind of respective responsibilities, and guess what? Facebook doesn't have one. So this is a bit of a can of worms, and Facebook are going to have to get quite serious about addressing it. But at the moment, at this point of time, as it stands, you are covered if you get unambiguous consent for the use of that pixel and Google Analytics. So make sure that you inform people about the use of the pixel, so that is some sort of cookie consent, which you see on most sites these days. Give them a link to something which specifies what exactly your cookie policy is and explains what data you have got on and what cookies you have got on your website. And just make sure, again, as before, you're tracking consent for the use of those cookies. Now, there's another area which is obviously quite popular at the moment as well, which is chatbots. Chatbots rely on data in order to be effective. And the whole idea about a chatbot is that they're kind of used as virtual assistants. So they ask a question, it knows some programmed answers, you ask the questions and it will give you the answers. But it needs to know about its users in order to have kind of meaningful conversations. And at the moment, the chatbot technology is a little bit like Pac-Man used to be in terms of computer games. It's still quite basic, but obviously as we get more and more advanced in terms of the programming and the artificial intelligence side of things, these chatbots will get incredibly sophisticated. Make your privacy policy clear. If you're using chatbots, make sure that it's really clear. These are some other points that were made. Make sure that personal data is stored encrypted and separated from any other data that you hold. Provide a way that allows users to be able to have their data forgotten through the chatbot. Provide a way that they can retrieve their data. And what it comes down to time and time again is just apply a privacy first design. It's natural for humans to fear what we can't see, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad. Unfortunately, we just tend to look for the worst, and we are coming from a background of having had our data raped, pillaged and generally abused by marketers, and nearly always for financial gain, unfortunately. But the reality is that it can also be used in ways that add huge value to the reader. It can enable us to see more of what we want and less of what we don't want. So let's take a quick walk through this slide. So in this bottom left hand corner, you've got a bunch of little plastic blue, red and green people that essentially symbolise people that are coming onto your website. You don't know that they're blue, red or green, they're just coming into your website. What you can do using the Facebook pixel is that you can see and you can target people who have visited certain pages on your website. So say you've got a page on there on back pain, for example. You can see all the little green people, they're all the back pain people. And using the Facebook pixel, you can retarget those people, those little green people, with, for example, an ad about next month's evening lecture on how to sleep better if you suffer from back pain. One example. Say you've got another bunch of people who visit your page on bike fit, and you just happen to be running a cycling injury prevention assessment or a mini bike fit assessment in 2 months' time. So you can create an ad that is specifically targeted to them that you know that they will be interested in. And your little red lot, maybe they've downloaded a running injury leaflet and you happen to be doing a free gait assessment somewhere down the line. Well, hey presto, you can target those people who visited that page. So suddenly everybody gets a better result. All of those people get information about things that they want. And let's face it, we can't put the genie back in the bottle, or the lamp, or the computer in this case. But with the help of GDPR and e-privacy, or PECR as we have it now, we can start to regain control and decide how we're going to let businesses treat us. And remember, one size doesn't fit all. You don't have to apply the same principle to every business you deal with. When the e-privacy regs come into force, people will be able to make a different choice about the different companies and about different types of data that those companies get to use. Some businesses, and I think this is particularly true for many of the small healthcare-based businesses like the ones that we run, have only ever been interested in helping people and adding value to people's lives, hence why so many of us are rubbish marketers ourselves. And we need to stay in business, yeah, but our priority most often lies with the patients or the clients that we treat. So most of you guys are most likely to be at the opposite spectrum of what has got us into this mess in the first place, of needing to impose these GDPR severity level regulations. Most healthcare professionals I know hardly ever even email their clients regularly. However, don't be fooled into thinking that's a good thing, because if you use a value approach, that actually can be really, really productive. Okay, but what does it really boil down to? Well, the main thing is, do not let it paralyze you. Running a business is hard enough. Get your privacy policy right and get it in front of people. Not me. I use the what if it was me check. So think about, would you be happy if somebody was using your data in the way that you're going to use somebody else's data? Always come back to that. Make sure you've got clear, unambiguous consent. Make sure third-party systems that you use are GDPR compliant. Make sure your systems are synced up. So if you've got more than one system hosting email addresses and somebody unsubscribes from one, make sure that syncs up, or you do it manually with another. And make sure that you offer an unsubscribe, but remember that it doesn't unsubscribe people out of a service delivery or contract obligations. So it doesn't stop you from sending any emails that you need to send in order to fulfill your contractual duty to them. To me, this is what it all comes down to: trust. Unfortunately, we're coming from a position of deep mistrust, which means it's going to take a long time to recover from it. But businesses that do it well really have an opportunity to shine. It will lead to a much more personalised human engagements. It will enhance and improve data management. It is going to encourage creativity. It is going to encourage us to deliver a much more valuable service. It will result in more relevant email correspondence, and over time it will increase trust and eventually, hopefully, a better return on investment. So all it remains for me to do is to say thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it, because I know time is very valuable these days, and particularly with all the work that's going on to do with GDPR. And this last thought really is that the future of marketing is tight, but it's also bright. Thanks very much for your time, guys. Bye.